how likely is there to be a ceasefire talk?
Well, the Iranians are hoping for a ceasefire, but so far it seems that the Saudis are very much intent on carrying out airstrikes against Yemen. The Iranians are very firm in their belief that the former president, Mansour Hadi, was unpopular. He did not have legitimacy because at the very beginning he was elected without any competition. The Americans and the Saudis installed him. He was supposed to be president, a transition president for 2 years. His mandate was over a year ago, so he is no longer the legitimate president, and he resigned. After resigning, he left the capital, then he went and then he left the country, and he invited a foreign country to bomb his people. So from the Iranian perspective, he's not the legitimate president. And at the same time, the concern that the Iranians have is that the Saudi government is making the same tragic mistake that they made in Syria and Iraq by supporting Wahhabi extremist groups. Right now, the new government, the Ansarullah, the Houthis, and the army, they're battling Al-Qaeda in Yemen. And at the same time, the Saudis are attacking them as well. So the Saudi government and Al-Qaeda are basically on the same side of the battlefield.
I see your point. On the other hand, Mr. Walsh, what do you think about the different layers you mentioned already, Sunni Shia, and also different regional powers with its conflict focusing on the country of Yemen? Meanwhile, tribal fighting going on within the country, different kinds of political sections also doing their fighting, all at the same time. What do you consider as the most important threat among all of these fightings? With that resolved or partially resolved, there's likely solutions for the others. Sir.
Well, I think, unfortunately, there are two different problems, and they're equally important, but they're different. One is the presence of Al-Qaeda, that is to say Sunni extremists who have been there for a while. It used to be that there were sort of three big parts here, the Al-Qaeda, the Houthi, and the government. And then the government sort of collapsed. And so you have Houthi and the Al-Qaeda still as strong forces there. So I think that's a threat. I also think that obviously ongoing conflict between this coalition and the Houthis is not good for Yemen and not good for the region. I think in the West, there's a tendency to oversimplify and say, oh, this is just proxies. This is the Saudi puppet and the Houthi are the Iranian puppet, and they're just battling it out. I think there's an element of truth in that, but it fails to recognize that the players on the ground also matter. The Houthis have been there a long time. They have their own interests. They have their own goals, regardless of what Iran wants, even though Iran can be influential. Same thing with the other groups. So there are some natural things on the ground. It's not just foreign players.
Can different sides in the face of fighting terrorism sit down together and really reach a deal? Is it possible, at least a distant one?
Well, I think you have to do this in steps. So the first order of business is a ceasefire. The Houthis said they're willing over the weekend, they're willing to talk about a ceasefire. The Saudis said they're willing to. Nothing's happened yet. So first step is ceasefire. Then once the fighting stops, the next step will be power negotiations about power sharing. Now the question is, and we find this over and over again in the Middle East, people are not very good at power sharing. They want to take all the power for themselves. And so the question is whether the Houthis will realize that they cannot govern as a minority and they have to share power, and whether the president and the tribes and other constituencies will be able to share power to put together some sort of coalition government. You know, obviously you can't have elections in the middle of a war zone, so that's not going to happen anytime soon. But it's first it's ceasefire, then it's power sharing, and then some sort of cooperation. But you know, I'm pretty sure feelings are running really high right now when the bombs are flying, so that makes it more difficult.
On the other hand, Professor Morandi, there is talk of a ceasefire, but it's only for 1 or 2 days for humanitarian issues. On the other hand, it is very unlikely, as Mr. Walsh just mentioned, for all sides to sit together. What can be the Iran role in this regard? In any way, can you bring at least the peace closer? Go ahead.
Well, first I think there's something that I have to add to what Jim said, and that is that it's Saudi Arabia that's bombing Yemen. Yemen is not attacking Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is committing aggression. It's doing the same thing that the Israeli regime did in Gaza. It's slaughtering innocent people. Just a few days ago, the Saudis bombed a dairy factory, killing tens of people in a city that is Shafi Sunni
That
Muslim.
I heard, but what
And
can be
as I
the
said,
Iranians' role in this regard?
Well, the Iranians have supported peace talks, and the Houthis and their allies, because it's not just the Houthis, it's the Houthis and the allies. What they want basically is independence from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has kept this country one of the poorest countries in the world for decades. The Houthis are willing to talk, but they said that we want to talk in a country that is not bombing us. They're not going to go to Riyadh when the Saudi government is slaughtering people in their country. So first there has to be a host, maybe a country like Oman. They could host peace talks. I'm just speculating.
Right.
I'm just giving out names because Oman has not carried out aggression. And the Saudis, though, I'm sure that Ansarullah, the Houthis, the army, I mean, the Saudis are bombing the army. They are willing to form a government with the different factions. But I think Saudi Arabia has to, once and for good, they have to recognize Yemen's independence. It's not their backyard.
All right,
and
Mr.
the Saudis have to stop supporting extremists.
Mr. Tong, final words from you. What can the international community do? After all, this is a very tightly fighting regional issue that we have seen reflected by the Yemen crisis. So many different layers. What can others do?
We can discuss this topic from two layers. The first is the United Nations. As we have witnessed in recent years, actually, the United Nations Security Council adopted several resolutions in dealing with the situation in Yemen. And they did play a very positive role in maintaining the peace and stability there. And the second layer is the regional organizations, for example, Gulf Cooperation Council. So such a council should play a very important role to find a peaceful solution for all the parties concerned to share the power and to have a unified country.
Well, there's a long list of should. Different sides should do certain things, but will they? Of course, that's the biggest question mark.